All right, guys, welcome to Wide Awake News Radio, hour number 2. Thank you very much, Eric Lovely and Dimcat, for a great first hour. We have about 97, 98, nearly 100 people in the chat room. If you want to join them, go to wideawakenews.com, click on the Wide Awake Radio button. We're going to bring on Doug Newberry here in a minute, and we're going to kind of continue on the same thing, same theme that Eric and Dimcat were on, but because it's important. But I'm going to take just a second and share with you the thoughts I put into a video within the last 20 minutes, because it is important. Well, you know, what we saw today happen with the Supreme Court coming out and talking about how Obamacare is constitutional. You know, we're not going to call it a mandate. We're going to call it a tax, and it's constitutional. We can go ahead and force you to buy whatever the hell we want to make you buy. So if I want you to, I want to force everybody listening to me now to go over to Doug Newberry's website and buy his investing system. You know why? Because I live in a shoddy, haphazard democracy, and I can do that in a shoddy, haphazard democracy. Look, I believe fully at this point in my radio career, in my YouTube career, look, there's a lot of people, myself included, who believe there's only one answer left. There's only one left, right? And it is complete and utter and total collapse. Collapse. Collapse of the political system, collapse of the corrupt financial system, real pushback, real civil unrest, people's finally standing up, because if we don't, the solution that's coming down the road, the solution that is coming down the road that I call the crisis of reality, this freight train that's about to run this country and the world over, is going to be far, far, far worse than if we just collapse this thing, hold accountable the people who have brought us to the financial brink, hold accountable the people who have sold out our country in order for profit, the people who have sold out the nation in order to rise politically, to get to that upper elite strata of the political circuit. If we hold these people, perp walk them, right, put them in prison for the rest of eternity, then begin rebuilding a constitutional republic, a true example for the rest of the world to look at and see what representative government is all about. We don't have anything close to representative government. Yet what happened today, this can make some people mad, but even if you can, it's meaningless. Listen, meaningless. Obamacare was not written in June of the year 2012. Obamacare was passed into law by our non-representing representatives in March of 2010. Obamacare could have been stopped before March of 2010. It cannot be stopped now. Okay? Listen, we had a very small majority of the Congress put this onerous legislation onto you, the people. That's what happens in a shoddy, haphazard democracy. That's what happened in March of 2010. So why do we want to have this big deal? It doesn't matter that 26 states don't want to implement Obamacare, and maybe some of them won't. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. What matters is this. An NBC article today came out right after this thing was announced. I quote, NBC, according to NBC, healthcare ruling set stage for fireworks in November. Aha! This is the real reason this is mainstream news. This is mainstream freakout news. It's even the real reason why there's a lot of people in alternative media losing sleep and sensationalizing and losing their mind about this ruling. The ruling is meaningless. The ruling is one more chink in the armor of the destruction of the Constitution and this nation. But it is by far and away not the first and not the most egregious. I wish the worst thing that was happening is my government was saying, you know what, Charlie? You're going to pay $1,000 a month so you can put insurance on you and your family. I wish that was the worst thing happening in my once great republic. By far and away, the least of which of things that I've seen recently in the last 5-6 years that I could be worried about is the Obamacare and this vote. But let's see what it did happen. Today when this news was announced, what do we have? We had the mainstream media on the right talking about, oh my God, we got to get rid of Obama. Romney's our man. Romney's the one. He'll do it. He'll repeal Obamacare. No, he will not. No, he will not. Period. Romney, his top icon of the Supreme Court, is Chief Justice Roberts. We all remember that debate. If you were foolish enough, like I was, to sit there and watch these all, where Romney got up there and said, "I look up to Chief Justice Roberts." Blah, blah, blah. Bull. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the opinion upholding Obamacare, saying it's a tax. We can tax you under the Commerce Clause. Blah, blah, blah. Chief Justice Robert was the swing vote that allowed Obamacare. So Mitt Romney, his boy on the Supreme Court, ain't going anywhere, folks. Ain't going anywhere. Try to get rid of Social Security. It isn't going anywhere. These are set in stone. Once the first installment is paid, once the first benefit is paid, it is pulling teeth to get rid of something. What would get rid of it? A collapse of the crony capitalist, crony democracy system. That would get rid of it. This collapse is inevitable. It's going to happen. We want to do it in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, after more and more and more this fraudulent failure is put onto our backs, and the solution out of it is going to be global war? Or do we want to do it now, when we still have something left of value in this country? If the Democrats, if you listen to me on the blue team and you're all excited that this piece of legislation is passed, do you really think, if it was designed to benefit you, the people, that you would be forced to buy a policy from a private insurance corporation? Do you really think that they let them write this legislation or have a very great deal of input into writing this legislation so it would benefit you? Are you kidding? Then you probably believed we would stop around the planet when we got the blue team in office. It's all a lie. There is no Democrat. There is no Republican. There is only dumbed down, watered down sheeple that will follow into these troughs that will lead to their own slaughter. There is no solution other than collapsing this corrupt, crony capitalist, crony democracy, finocracy. This system is coming down, is the only solution. Everything else, smoke and mirrors. Everything else, window dressing. Everything else is put before you for your consumption, for our consumption, so we can sit back and say, yes, I have a hand in my government. Yes, I have a hand because I voted for Mitt Romney, Barack Obama, fill in the blank. And that includes Ron Paul, Rand Paul, or any of these others that claim that they're going to come in there and change things up. They can't. Even if they are good intention, even if they have a great track record, they cannot. Bought and paid for is our system. All right, that's enough going on about that. Doug Newberry, welcome to the program. Doug's websites are Investing Systems. I'll put that link into the chat room, investingsystems.com, as well as TeaPartyNewsWatch.com. Doug was on for a little bit with us. We had a little technical issue last week, but I wanted to get him back on. And Doug, welcome to the program.
Hey, how you doing, Charlie?
Pretty good. I'm pretty good. Thanks for letting me vent and get that off my chest. I feel a little bit better now.
That was nice. I like that rant.
Well, let me ask your opinion on something. You heard the rant.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think, man? Am I off base here? Is this a big deal?
Well,
deal?
Let's just, when people talk about things like that, there's a lot of folks who say, oh, those are the crazies, they got their tinfoil underpants on, they're all just, it's all a big conspiracy. But look around. Wide Awake News, hello, Wide Awake, take a look around, folks. We're living in, pretty much nothing I wouldn't consider a complete corporatocracy, fascism kind of a situation now. You got corporations spending as much money as they want in politics, bankers printing as much money as they need to bail themselves out, politicians voting themselves raises and trading on insider information. In the media, the mainstream media just lying to everybody every day. So, if you don't really, if the people don't wake up and the people don't put their foots down, which may or may not ever happen, then we're going to continue to live in tyranny. That's all. It'll just continually to get worse. It's like the boiling frog. That's exactly what it is. It's
you're
incrementalism.
And that's why in this rant, in this video I'm up tonight, I call it. You know what? And I don't even know now, living in my republic, right? the same republic I went to, and fought a war for because I wanted to uphold the principles of freedom and democracy and blah blah. I don't even know if these words that I'm uttering now, they probably could get me a black bag thrown into Gitmo or some other torture camp because rabble-rousing belligerence will not be tolerated in the new U.S. All right, it's not a question in there for you. So let me phrase it for you. Let's start off this way. We have about what do we got? About 6 minutes before the break. This officially is the first time we've had you on the program, and I'm really my new guest. Why don't you first of all tell us a little bit about yourself? I was introduced to you through Don Harold, and like I said, the little bit we did have you on, I heard enough that I wanted to have you back. So give us a little bit of a background on Doug Newberry.
Well, I'll tell you, I started in the financial software business. We built our first piece of software back in 1994. And I hadn't yet figured out that, financial markets are what financial markets are. And so we started building financial software, and I became a real avid watcher of the markets. And I've seen so much shenanigans going on, that you would some of it just leaves you sitting there with your mouth hanging open because you can't believe this is legal in America, right?
Right.
And so then one day, I kind of got woken up, and started, getting a lot of alternative news and everything, just turning off all that mainstream stuff. And I tell you what, once you start down that rabbit hole, there is no bottom to it. And there's some swamps along the way that you don't want to fall into because, you just go down crazy land. But, the truth is not what most people think it is. And then one day I became a Tea Party activist before the Tea Party was hijacked by the Republicans. And the thing was the Supreme Court upheld the bailout of General Motors, which violated probably 400 years of property law that we've operated on since, we were European colonies. And I couldn't believe it. And I'm like, I can't believe this is happening in my America that I thought I grew up in, And I've been kind of an outspoken activist type ever since.
Well, it's, if you even, this must have been, 2009 when you saw the bailout of the automotive industry? Or are you talking about,
well, that's when I got active. I woke up a few years before that, but that's when I got active. I was like, look, this is not right what's going on here today, folks. People are being systematically ripped off. They're having their wealth pilfered from them generation after generation. Right. What's going on here is, quite frankly, people ought to be going to prison. But you know what? Nobody cares because, the air conditioning still works. The cable's still on. There's a couple of beers in the fridge. We're good.
Yeah, we're good to go. Let's just keep the party going. And my story is somewhat similar. I first marched in a Tea Party, I'm doing air quote, protest back in 2000 under George W. Bush in 2007 when we saw, or 2008 rather, when we saw these $600 checks going out, this first official stimulus package.
Right.
Then listening to a lot of folks in alternative media about an imminent collapse and trying to pull out.
Hang on. Moment of truth. You cashed the check though, didn't you?
Yeah, of course I did.
Yeah,
right, here's the deal. It's my money, right? So, but I didn't see that as a viable economic solution to the downturn in the economy. Yeah, of course I did. However, in going a few weeks and months ahead of that event, I was listening to a lot of folks in alternative media, people like Peter Schiff, and they were calling for this 2008 debacle, and I tried to take out as much as I possibly could of my retirement. And here's the deal: I had to fill out 16 pages of forms. I'm 100% vested in it, right? I could take out 50% of it, and then I got to pay a ridiculous amount of tax on it. It took me 16 pages, and I got to pay a stiff penalty. I got half of my money, not even half, really, truthfully, about a third of my money. And when the collapse did occur, right, I'm watching Hank Gunslinger Polson come out with a Post-it note, one page, saying, give me $700 billion. And when Congress said no, I thought, yeah, good for you, Congress. The next day we saw, 500, 600, 700 point drop. And next thing I know, I live in the bailout nation, and it's been nonstop financial tyranny, finocracy since then. And it continues, Doug, just to get worse and worse. And I'm convinced, literally, at this point, that we had this little bit of a debate between me and you and Don, where are we going to collapse? What's going to lead to this collapse? I know that Don's opinion and yours was, well, as long as the lights are on and the beer's in the fridge, people are just going to keep keeping on. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing in this country, on this planet, bears out your guys' thesis perfectly.
Well, here's the thing. Unless the people actually revolt, look, the system's hopelessly broken. I'll tell you, about the best thing that could happen to us is we get like a benevolent dictator who could go in there and take all their unconstitutional laws that they've written over the last 50 years and use those powers to set things right, and then, create freedom again and do away with all those laws and resign. I mean, anything short of that, come on. What somebody put it really well the other day. They're like, the politicians have destroyed integrity and leadership. The bankers have destroyed your wealth. The medical community has destroyed your health. The, media companies have destroyed your culture, right? I mean, everything that you count on somebody to do for society, they have ruined it. And, it's time for a wholesale restructuring. When we were kids, there were hundreds and hundreds of media outlets. And now all the news is controlled by like 6 corporations, and that's it.
That's a fact. In 1984, there was 50 organizations that controlled 80% of the news disseminated around the world, mainly by print and television. And that's a shockingly small number in the 80s, 50. And you're right. Today, we have 90% controlled by a handful. And this is why we have, and you know what's comical about this? And guys, I apologize. I'm getting messages from Brett via Skype that my mic's fading in and out, and I don't know the problem. I'll try to redo it during the break in about 2 minutes. So I apologize. I'm going to get closer to the mic here. What's funny about this is one of the things that happened today in a media that is controlled and completely by 6 corporations or thereabouts. It might be 5 at this point. Is the news that came out. I mean, it was made for TV drama. The Supreme Court vote's coming out. Dun, dun, dun. We had the cable news. And then it was reported wrong by Fox and CNN.
I saw that.
Yeah, their initial report was, it's been overturned. Hooray for democracy. Hooray for the neocons. And, 15 minutes later, well, no, it's not really overturned. Just one little small portion of it is. But you, American, you still get to be forced to buy insurance. And then the hoopla began. Bill O'Reilly, I'm sure, is freaking out right now. Rush Limbaugh literally almost had a coronary today on his radio program because he had to play his part, man. We got to be upset neocons.
Dude, today was one of those rare days when you get an opportunity to watch the left versus right game, playing both of them from their heels, because they didn't know what the Supremes were going to sing, right? And so, once the song was out, and they got it wrong because the Judge Roberts, way back deep in it, decided to call it a tax, and the whole thing was just comical. And it took them really about 3 hours to distribute new talking points, both left and right. And then you started hearing it, Hannity, Limbaugh, Fox News, MSNBC, it just all was the talking points. And how we're going to spin it into November, because now it's about the people need to stop Obamacare or whatever. And it was funny to watch them struggle, because usually their messages are so well crafted, so well orchestrated across so many media outlets that it just gets boring. And today they were scrambling, so it's kind of humorous.
Well, and here's the thing, I believe that. Is the decision by the justices organic? I mean, there's a lot of people conspiratorially inclined to think this was baked in the cake, this is dyed in the wool, this decision was going to come out this way. But I don't necessarily believe that. I mean, I believe if they're destroying the Constitution under precedent law. It was pretty easy to see that they could uphold this thing. There's all kinds of things that we're forced to do under the Commerce Clause that a lot of people, myself included, believe are unconstitutional. But I believe this decision wasn't known, like you said, because of that exact reason. However, I do believe this wholeheartedly. Regardless of what that decision was, they were ready to start the propaganda machine rolling. It didn't really matter. It's just like the election. It doesn't really matter.
Well, yeah, but they got thrown such a curveball because they ruled that the Commerce Clause was unconstitutional. That's what everybody thought the deal was. And then it turns out that Judge Roberts decides it's a tax, and now it's perfectly fine. And,
Right.
I mean, dude, what a curveball!
Yeah, it was unconstitutional to use it under as a mandate under the Commerce Clause, but as a tax, it's fine.
Right. And so that's what was crazy, because nobody, look, people have pontificated on this healthcare bill for, 2.5 years now? And nobody called that. But I will tell you this. I remember listening to the oral arguments, right, for this Obamacare trial at the Supreme Court. And when they brought it up and they admitted to the justices, well, yes, this is a tax.
Right.
I remember specifically when that happened, and I thought that might be significant.
All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm your host, Charlie McGrath. Doug Newberry is our guest. We burnt the first half up very quickly talking about, Obamacare and really the insignificance of this action today, but the overall very significant fact that constitutional republic no longer exists. Barely can we even call it a shoddy democracy. And I skipped over the fact real quick that Doug's had, over a decade in the investing world. This is what he does for a living. And since we have him on here, an expert on here who does this for a living, looks at these markets every day, looks at Wall Street every day, looks at the financial system every day. Let's pick his brain a little bit. So, I know there's a couple different topics we want to hit, but let's start off with some financial news. Just basically, every Thursday morning I go in and I look at the jobs report, right? The first time unemployment claim, rather. And today I saw we adjusted last week up to nearly 400,000, and then we backed off this week, so we can say we had a 6,000 person decline. Almost irrelevant statistic anymore. It's more of like going to a casino and playing the big spinning wheel to see if you can guess right what the number crunchers, the bean counters, are going to come up with, so they can readjust it next week. But we did see the markets kind of freak out today, right? We had this 150 point down on the Dow at one point on the announcement of. This is just so animal spirit. We're going to use these markets to sway opinion, and it's very interesting, if nothing else. I don't know how people make a living like you and others make a living doing this, but it's interesting to watch. We had 150 points off on the Dow. That was ended up the day with a big rally, as you said during the break, in the S&P to cause everything to come up and end on a happy note. However, there's really no news to cause any kind of a rally. Plenty of news to be pessimistic about. So let's get your take on what's going on in the markets and elaborate, to the whole market in general, the financial system, the sovereign debt crisis. Let her rip, Doug.
Well, let's just start with this. The whole thing's a house of cards. Okay, we know that going in. Every developed economy in the world is using a debt-based financial system, which, as you and I both know, is inevitably doomed to fail. The question is, how long can they keep it going, and what do they got to do to keep it going? That kind of thing. I can remember Mark Haynes used to open up 9 o'clock show on CNBC every morning, and may he rest in peace. He would open up the show with live from the financial capital of the world. And, the financial capital of the world is no longer Wall Street. The financial capital of the world is Ben Bernanke's office. And everybody lives or dies by the moves of the Fed. So, the Fed will come out with QE3. Here's what it is. The Fed comes out with QE3, decides they're going to print a bunch, which is quantitative easing, the third round. And if he decides he's going to print even more money, thereby devaluing the dollars that we have. Okay, so let's say you're a company, you're Procter & Gamble, right? And the money just got diluted, but your company didn't. So if your shares were worth $19 yesterday, are they worth 20 today? And are they worth 21 the next day? And so that's why the market gets these big rallies on quantitative easing. And so, anybody who will tell you that Wall Street is a free, fair, transparent, legitimate system of economics is full of it. What you want is somebody who's going to tell you that Wall Street has always been a rigged game, banking is a scam, the financial system is inevitably doomed, but yes, we can still trade stocks and make money in that environment because, you just have to know what kind of an environment you're in. Look, these powers that be have proven to me that over the years that there is no market that they will not interfere in. In fact, traders just got busted in the last couple of days managing the LIBOR interest rate, which the LIBOR interest rate is the London Interbank Overnight Rate.
Right.
And that really dictates a lot what people pay for credit cards and car loans
It
and house
dictates a lot
loans.
of small businesses have their operating line.
Right, and so it's all tied to the LIBOR. And so the LIBOR is interesting. It's set in what they call an Olympic fashion. They take the input from 16 people of what should be the rate. They kick off the highest 4, they kick off the lowest 4, and average the 8 from the middle, and that's it. And so the traders were telling the investment arm of these financial houses what did they need the rate to be. And so it was being skewed because these guys were gaming the system. Look, if it's the oil market and the oil price gets too high, they'll open the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, right? If it's gold and silver and the price is running up too high, they raise the margin requirements. If it's the stock market, it's quantitative easing. If it's bonds and U.S. treasuries, the Fed prints the money, buys the treasuries. I mean, it's just the whole damn thing is a shell game. That's all it is. But, you can still make money. In fact, here's the thing. The latest thing is called financial repression. And what financial repression is interest rates so low on your savings, your CDs, your money market accounts, that it forces people to take on riskier investments, and they're trying to drive people back into the stock market. But, if people aren't armed with the right kind of information, that can be deadly, as you know.
Do you ever just open, at what time, I don't know what time Eastern this vote came down or the news came out, but yeah, one thing I thought of when I first heard this news, roughly at noon East Coast time, was, oh man, you know what? I wish I had the opportunity to put a couple $1,000s in an insurance company or hospital chains or something like that, because they're going to love this. At least the markets are going to love this for them. And sure enough, I mean, those guys took a big increase there. So do you ever just open the newspaper and say, let's see, I've got Goldman Sachs talking about Operation Twist. I've got sources from the Federal Reserve and outlying Federal Reserve presidents talking about Operation Twist. Maybe it's time I go long equities.
Well, let me tell you something. There's plenty of reasons to be optimistic, and I'll tell you what they are. Because typically, the alternative media can be a little doom and gloom, all the collapse is coming. Sure, it's coming, right? Okay. But let's think about this for a second. We live in a world where 25% of all of the commerce that's ever taken place in the last 10 years. There are 7 billion people on the planet. Everybody wants to buy something tomorrow, right? And so, the opportunity for economic growth is there. It's policies of the bankers, the politicians, and the large multinational corporations. Some of my favorites like Monsanto and News Corp, and, the list goes on and on. I've always wanted to create what I call the New World Order Index, where I'd add companies to it like the Dow Jones 30 or the S&P 500.
Man, you should do that, and you should throw a registered trademark on that, because that would be followed.
Yeah, the New World Order Index. I mean, dude, these companies aren't going under. Buy some shares of that.
Yeah.
Look, you want to bitch about the New World Order? Buy a few shares, man. You may live to bitch another day.
No doubt about it. I can imagine the makeup of that index. Raytheon, all kinds of the defense industry.
Oh, here's the thing. We could have the healthcare sector of the New World Order Index. We could have the media sector. We could have the agribusiness sector. We could have the banking sector, of course. We could have any of the sectors, the telecoms, the Apple following you around with your little smartphone, spying on everything you do. Hey, look, they're in, So, people like to think some of these companies are cool. Google, you kidding me? They'd be at the top of the charts in the technology index for the New World Order. I mean, please, Facebook? Of course, they're in. They're selling. Look, when you get to use a service on the internet and it's free, I got news for you. The product they're selling is you.
That's a good point. That's a great point. Well, let's, the markets are rigged. I don't think that's really, especially to this crowd, really news. So,
rigged. I wouldn't say rigged. Like, you on a day-to-day basis, you can trade and make money. But the fundamental economic environment in which the markets operate, that is rigged. And the entire financial system, like where money comes from, that's just a shell game. But the markets itself, you can use technical analysis. You can effectively, do it. But you got to know.
And you know what? I've heard that message. I've heard that message from professional traders over the last several years, and obviously, some of these professional traders, yourself included, are still doing it. So I mean, the proof's in the pudding. You're making a living at this. The question, of course, is for how long? I mean, when does command economy equal? There's no need for this anymore because it's all controlled from on high.
Well, and let me just tell you this. There's a bunch of us guys in the alternative media who they call the doom and gloomers. Let me tell you something. I cannot take the possibility of complete and total economic, social, and political collapse off the table. And so, rule number one is you need to be prepared for that. Storable foods, some hard currencies, copper coins, silver coins, gold coins, depending on who you are. And, I'll give you another little tip. In a real economic collapse, you can walk around with gold coins all day. Nobody's going to want them because they don't trust them. But if you got junk jewelry, you can barter all day long with that stuff. I learned that from a guy who lived through the collapse in Argentina. He said, nobody wanted your silver coins, but if you had some junk silver jewelry, they would deal with you.
How come? Why is that?
Well, because the coins could just be fake, and they might be for dollar denominations. Like, let's say the price of gold goes to $5,000 an ounce. What, are you going to walk around with a 1 ounce coin? What the hell are you going to buy? A loaf of bread? I mean, what are you going to do with it?
Right.
Silver coin might be worth 200, right? But a copper coin, which you could buy now for probably $2 or $1.50, depending, I suppose, on where you get them, might be worth $20. See, now you got some walking around money. And so, I would say, but the junk jewelry, the people knew that it was gold jewelry or it was silver jewelry, and so they would barter for it. But with the coins, they were very suspicious.
That makes sense. And I've had we have Gabe Elton. He's one of the sponsors of the program. He comes on and talks about precious metals all the time. And one of the questions inevitably we get out of the chat is why junk silver? This is pre 64 or 64 and older quarters of dime.
Well, you can go online and you can buy a product that's called the Survival Bag of Dimes, and it's like 1,000 silver dimes in a bag. And, awesome, because those are small little coins. They wouldn't be worth so much that you couldn't use them for barter.
Okay, Doug, let me ask you this.
Well, no, they're real.
What happens to get, this is a question that because we will jump from pre-break, we're talking about Obamacare and the tyranny of the majority and shoddy democracy, and now we're talking about using junk dimes in a post-apocalyptic environment.
Because we can't take that scenario off the table.
Right. I agree with you 100%. I'm not debating that. But what I'm asking is, what facilitates the connection? What happens during the break when the cameras or when the microphones are off to facilitate going from tyranny of the majority to post-apocalyptic collapse? Is it the sovereign debt crisis that's conveniently rearing its ugly head over the last 4 years?
Let me tell you something. If we had created money out of value back in 1913 when we changed the financial system the last time, we would all be rich now. There'd be plenty of money for health care. Nobody'd be worrying about it. The schools would be plenty funded. Here's the thing. Think about this for a second. We started the Federal Reserve debt-based money system roughly 100 years ago, right? 1913. And so here's the thing. Since then, 5 generations of Americans have worked. They've innovated, they've paid off their debts, they've built businesses, they've grown, they've increased productivity thousands of fold over 100 years, right? Where's all the wealth? It's gone. The bankers have it all, literally have it all, and then they had the chops to leverage all that money 30, 40 to 1 and blow up the whole damn game and then send us the bill. I tell you, it's staggering. Once you wrap your mind around what's really going on, you cannot believe. It's so ridiculous that you cannot believe that this is the system that the greatest nation in the world operates under. I'm telling you, it's nothing less than slavery, and should be the civil rights issue of all time. Sound money made of value instead of debt, and your society will prosper on every level. I don't know why it's so hard to understand.
Because we have a built-in propaganda news network. We have a built-in propaganda flow from Washington, D.C. that we can't be in control of our own money, and we have generations that have been brought up in this. Unless you're 100 years old, you don't know a system that is outside of the Federal Reserve System.
Well, there is no financial education on any of it. Let me tell you something. I had a guy tune into my show. I do a Sunday night talk show. It's free. You can catch it at markettoolbox.tv if you're interested. We talk about the markets. I had a guy watching my show. He says, dude, I've been an accountant for 30 years, a certified public accountant, and I had no idea how the financial system worked until I started watching your show. And I was like, oh my God, that's part of the problem.
Yeah, people are just trained on how to function inside the system we currently have.
Right. Here's the thing. The powers that be only want the population educated enough to turn the knobs on the machine that owns them. And that is it. They don't want anybody strong enough to figure it out and say, wait a minute, what the hell is this? That's what they don't want.
Absolutely.
And look, we keep pouring more and more money into the school system and the test scores keep getting lower. I mean, please.
This is a fact. This is the fact. Look, I've been in the building industry in one form or other for 20 years, right? And so in this career, I've met all kinds of people, right, from bank presidents down to homeowners type of thing. And I've made a lot of friends, especially in the banking community, regional bank for the most part. And I'll go have lunch with the vice president of a local regional bank and sit there and talk with her, and we'll get into the topic of money creation. We'll get into the topic of fiat money. We'll get into the topic of fractional reserve banking.
Let me guess.
Yeah.
This person probably doesn't even understand it.
Nope. Not a clue.
Stunning, isn't it? Dude, I had my credit card was getting pinged by some website in China like every 108 minutes for, some dollar amount. Anyway, they flagged it as fraud. I had to go down to the bank and, fill out some paperwork or whatever. And she's got this sign on her desk, very proudly displayed. And it says, accounts insured by the FDIC up to $250,000. And I said, hey, I see you got this little sign on your desk here. I said, they're broke, right? She says, what do you mean? I had to laugh. I said, look, go to the Fed's website and look up the failed bank list, I was like, they're out of money. They don't do anything except facilitate the takeover of a broken bank by a bigger broke bank. That's all they do.
That's right.
And they don't have any money to insure your deposits, and I don't think, quite frankly, you should have that sign sitting on your desk because it's just not true.
It's hopetimism. That's a placard of hopetimism. Feel good about putting your money in this bank.
Hopium is what they're doing.
Hopium. That's right. That's exactly right. Give us that where we can check your program out then again.
You can go to markettoolbox.tv. We do a live show every Sunday night, and the archives are all up there, so you can.
Do you have the archives at your other sites as well?
No, just that site. That's the only place. Markettoolbox.tv.
I want to make sure I got the name before we run out of time, since it's your first time being a full hour guest. I don't want to be rude and cut you off at the end before you can get out your information. So, as far as waking up, though, I will say this. The banker in question that I'm thinking of, over the last 3 years, they're certainly starting to understand better. They're coming around. They're seeing the light, especially when, in 2008, we had close to 10,000 banks in this country. Now we're sitting at, about 60, 800, 7,000, somewhere in that ballpark, and more of them are failing every single day. A lot of them are trying to figure out, wait a minute, how is this Wells Fargo franchise across the street, or this, we're fill in the blank, too big to fail across the street, they have nothing to worry about. How come we, and the banker I'm thinking of, didn't really get into consumer loans. They got more into commercial loans. And a lot of the businesses failing that these loans are holding, they did everything right, but they still run the risk of going out of business. They're starting to see it. They're waking up. And even the people that I talk to on a daily basis around the country that aren't part of this program or are not what I would consider to be awake, they're starting to see the light, the forest through the trees.
Well, even we have the Audit the Fed bill just was passed out of committee, and so it's going to a vote.
Give us some details on that. 2 minutes left.
Well, there's a bill out for a full audit of the Fed, which would have the General Accounting Office go through all their books, the meeting minutes, all their communications, everything. Full audit of the Fed, right? And this is only about 90 years overdue. Anyway, it got passed out of committee, so it'll go to a vote on the whole Congress floor, where it has 263 co-sponsors, which is great news because you only need about 218 votes to pass something. But then it'll go to the Senate. Now, there's probably going to run into a little more problems. But I will tell you what, folks, keep your eye on this bill, and the guy who kills this is one you want to vote out. I will guarantee you that. And if anything else, call your senator, call your congressman, and tell them to support the Audit the Fed bill, especially your senators. Get on those people like there's no tomorrow.
When is this
here's the thing. Those who make, peaceful revolution inevitable make violent revolution, or peaceful revolution impossible, make violent revolution inevitable. And, there's still a chance, if we could get an audit of the Fed, it would become clear what kind of a scam this is. They would have to report it. Hopefully they would actually talk about it on television. I doubt that, but
I do as well. And I'm not going to be negative about it. I was going to say, look, we'll see this watered down Dodd-Frank version of the Audit the Fed bill, but I'm not going to be negative about it. What is this bill number again?
Right off the top of my head, I don't know, but it's Audit the Fed.
And it's going to the Senate next, or it's going to the House?
Yeah, it's going to the full House next, but it should pass because they have 263 co-sponsors. Which, I got to tell you, Ron Paul, when he introduced this kind of stuff 10 years ago, he'd get 5 sponsors.
Right.
So, big step forward.
Well, it's a good step forward. It's only about a decade past due, though, and I'm afraid the freight train of reality, the crisis of reality, will hit before the mass awakening occurs. Once again, it leads me to the opening statement. Is collapse inevitable? And if so, isn't it better to do it now while there's still something left in the country to salvage? Doug?
Yeah, I tell you, we need nothing short of a peaceful revolution.
I hear you.
And then if you don't get one, then you'll get what you get.
That's exactly right. Doug Newberry, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on. We'll get you on again real soon. Guys, please enjoy Jeff Prince. He is coming up next. We will see you tomorrow with Karen's Corner. She has a great program lined up for you. Please show up and support her efforts. All right, guys. Enjoy Jeff. Have a good night. Peace.
Thanks, man.